So 20 years ago this month, the tax preparer, say that 10 times fast, H&R Block anyway, offered customers a chance to win $1 million in a drawing. And they had a winner, Glenn and Gloria Sims of Sewell, New Jersey. They actually won the drawing, but when the H&R Block representative contacted them with the good news, they refused to believe it. They thought it was a scam. And even though they repeatedly contacted the Sims by both phone calls and email, the Sims still thought it was a scam, and they either hung up the phone or threw away the mail. Finally, just before the deadline, H&R Block decided to try one more time. He called one last time to let the Sims know that the deadline was almost there and that their story of actually refusing the $1 million was going to be on the Today Show. At that point, Mr. Sims decided he maybe should investigate more fully. And they accepted their $1 million, and they actually appeared on the Today Show to confirm that they had finally claimed the $1 million prize that they had refused to believe in. Well, we're in a series called Follow, and we're looking at what it means to follow Jesus by looking at his life in the book of Mark. And today we're going to come across a story of a man who has trouble believing. Let me set the scene before we go there. Last week, we saw Jesus take Peter, James, and John, three of his disciples, up to the top of the mountain. And while they were there, Jesus' glory was revealed partially. His clothes were dazzling white, and the presence of God enveloped them, and they were terrified. It was the experience of a lifetime. Okay, well, today now we see they come off of the mountain, and that's where we pick up the story. This is Mark chapter 9, verse 14. It says, "When they returned to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd surrounding them, and some teachers of religious law were arguing with them." Okay, stop there for just a minute. What a jolt of reality, right? I mean, Peter, James, and John, they were standing at the top of a mountain with Jesus, having this glory-filled, breathtaking moment. And then half an hour later, they're down at the base of the mountain in the middle of an argument with the religious leaders. And that is pretty much the way it goes, isn't it? I mean, we have these fleeting mountaintop experiences with God, but the rest of the time it's just noisy and angry and exasperating and discouraging. And here's the thing, though. That is exactly where God has placed us, in the middle of the mess, because that's where he does his work in us, and that's where he does his work through us. We are not supposed to stay on the mountaintop, at least not until heaven. So that's just a good reminder. Verse 15, "When the crowd saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with awe, and they ran to greet him." Now I have a question right away. Why were they overwhelmed with awe? I don't know. Maybe Jesus still has the glow of the transfiguration upon him, God's glory on him. Or maybe it's simply that's like, hey, there he is. There's Jesus. And then they've heard so much about him and what he says and what he does that they simply can't wait to see him. It's just another reminder that Jesus was the kind of person that you and I would be drawn to and fascinated by and want to be around. Let's keep reading. Verse 16. "What is all this arguing about?" Jesus asked. One of the men in the crowd spoke up and said, "Teacher, I brought my son so you could heal him. He is possessed by an evil spirit that won't let him talk. And whenever this spirit seizes him, it throws him violently to the ground. Then he foams at the mouth and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid." That Greek word there for rigid literally means he is withering away. Okay, so the boy is dying. The man continues, "So I asked to cast out the evil spirit, but they couldn't do it." Jesus said to them, "You faithless people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." See, Jesus isn't all that excited to be coming off the mountaintop either. It's like, seriously, guys, I leave you for 2 hours and you try to heal a kid, but you end up somehow in a fight? I can't believe it. Having said that, however, when Jesus says, "You faithless people, how long must I be with you?" He is not saying, "I just wish you would all go away." Okay, Jesus here is genuinely lamenting their lack of faith. It's like he's saying, okay, am I the only one here who really believes that God is God? Is there no one else in the room who has faith in God's ability to do the impossible? When will you guys finally get it? See, Jesus knows that his time is short. The cross is rapidly approaching, and he longs for them to know and trust and experience God the same way he does. In the meantime, though, Jesus doesn't throw up his hands and walk away in disgust, because here's the thing, he never gives up on us. He takes immediate action. Verse 20, it says, "So they brought the boy, but when the evil spirit saw Jesus, it threw the child into a violent convulsion, and he fell to the ground, writhing and foaming at the mouth." Stop for a second here, because notice the power of Jesus' presence. Notice the power of Jesus' presence. He doesn't say a word, but as the demon gets close to him, it loses control. Okay, demons cannot be in the presence of Jesus without panicking, because he is so powerful. Many of you know that we have a partnership with Cornerstone Church and School Academy in Haiti. And in Haiti, some people practice voodoo, which can lead them to become demonized or demon-possessed. And I have actually seen it on several occasions when we've visited there in Haiti. Now, honestly, dealing with demons, that is way outside of my experience. And so I talked to the Haitian pastors, as I said, what do you guys do? What do you do when you experience demons? And they said, okay, you know what the most effective way to deal with demons is? Worship Jesus. They said we worship. And as we worship, it confuses the demons. As we proclaim Jesus as King, the demons can't stand it and they leave, and people get healed. Our spiritual enemies cannot stay long in the presence of Jesus. And so this demon, as the boy draws near to Jesus, this demon goes crazy, throws the boy on the ground. Jesus stays calm. Verse 21. "How long has this been happening?" Jesus asked the boy's father. He replied, "Since he was a little boy. The spirit often throws him into the fire or into water, trying to kill him. Have mercy on us and help us if you can." If you can? Did he just say that? If you can? I mean, this is Jesus you're talking to, fella. Now, before you dismiss this father for his lack of faith, let's look at it from his point of view. Okay, for many, many years, since the boy was young, he has watched helplessly as his son is tormented by demons and is thrown into fire and thrown into water and is used as a channel for the demon's hatred. He hears that Jesus and his disciples have the power to heal, and so he brings his son to them, hoping for deliverance, but the disciples are unable to do anything. So when Jesus shows up and the distraught man brings the boy to him, what happens? The demon goes crazy and throws the boy on the ground. And so the man thinks, well, maybe Jesus wants to help, but maybe this demon is too strong even for Jesus. This is a good place to make a side note. There is nothing too strong for Jesus. There is no power that is greater than his. There is no sin that is so great that his death on the cross doesn't cover it. There is no situation that is so big that he can't handle it. There is no action, no thought, no word, no emotion, so there's no circumstance that has more power than Jesus has, and he wants to bring his power into our lives. He wants to heal us. He wants to set us free. Years ago, Sherry and I had a conversation with a woman who told us that she didn't really believe in Jesus or his death and resurrection, and that she didn't really need him. And then toward the end of the conversation, she said this. She said, and besides, there are some things I've done that he could never forgive. And that wasn't the end of the conversation. We said, oh, no, there's nothing that Jesus can't forgive if you will let him. And she later chose to follow Jesus. Do you know anyone like that? Who in your life needs to hear that Jesus is powerful, that he is for them, and that he can bring them life and hope and healing and forgiveness? Pray for them and then look for opportunities to help them know and follow Jesus. Or maybe it's you. Maybe you need to know that. If so, let us know. We would love to sit down and have a conversation about what it means to experience the life and freedom of Jesus. All right, let's get back to our story. Verse 22, the Father says, have mercy on us and help us if you can. Verse 23, what do you mean if I can? Jesus asked. Anything is possible if a person believes. Now, I want to stop there for a moment because I want to clarify something. Jesus says that anything is possible if a person believes. Now, we hear that and we focus on the second part, if a person believes. We think if I just have enough faith, if you can just believe hard enough, then you can do anything. But if you read it more closely, notice that Jesus does not say you can do anything. He says anything is possible. In other words, that is, anything is possible for God. There are no limits to God's power. You know, people say all the time, well, just have faith. You got to have faith. Well, how do you do that? Exactly. How do you work up enough faith? Well, you don't. You can't. See, faith is not about conjuring up an adequate amount of emotion or spiritual feeling of some sort. Faith is simply me believing that nothing is impossible for God. It's me knowing that his power has no limits and me trusting him in this particular moment that I'm in. Now, that does not mean that he will do whatever I ask him to, whatever I want him to, but I can ask. Sherry and I had a chance this week to spend some time with my parents in Wisconsin. While we were there, I was talking to my cousin. He manages a retreat center there, and they're building prayer cabins, and they're so popular that people are filling them up faster than they can build them. And so they've been building during COVID, and of course it's very expensive. And my cousin Randy told me, he said, I have been praying that God will multiply our 2x4s. And I started laughing, and he said, no, I'm serious. I've been asking God to multiply our 2x4s, to make the wood stretch and grow and just use less than maybe we need. And he said, yesterday, the contractor came up and told me, he said, you know what? Funniest thing, I ended up with too many 2x4s. I had to return them to the lumberyard. I've never had that happen before. Now, what was that? Was that the lumberyard sending too many 2x4s? Well, maybe. Or maybe it was God multiplying lumber. I don't know. But here's the thing. He has the power to do that. He has the power to do that. And faith is not me believing hard enough. It's like, okay, God, do this. It's me just knowing that God's power is not limited. And he wants to bring his power to bear in my life. Again, not necessarily in all the ways that I ask him, but he is there. All right, back to verse 23. What do you mean, if I can? Jesus asked. Anything is possible if a person believes. The Father instantly cried out, I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. Now, I have to confess that this right here, this is my favorite prayer in the whole Bible. I love this prayer. It's honest, it's real, it's humble, it's me. It's my prayer. And I would guess it's probably your prayer too. And that's good because that's the kind of prayer that God is looking for. And honestly, I'm not sure there's any other way to live. So see, if somebody ever tells you that they are 100% confident all the time about God and his work in their life, they are either Jesus or they're lying or they're deceived. See, faith is not being 100% certain. Okay? Faith has zero swagger. Faith has no glossy finish. Faith has no perfect lines. To have faith in Christ is to trust God in the midst of your doubt. To have faith is simply to pray, I believe, help my unbelief. Even as I'm believing, there's a part of me that doesn't want to. And God, I cannot see, but I know that you can. And so I'm going to choose to trust you with this. One of my favorite devotional writers is Amway Nowen. In a book called Living Reminder, he says, prayer is a way of being empty and useless in the presence of God, and so of proclaiming our basic belief that all is grace and nothing is simply the result of hard work. I believe. Help my unbelief. I am weak. I have doubts. My first inclination is not to trust you, God, so help me rest in your grace. That is a great way to pray. Verse 25. When Jesus saw that the crowd of onlookers was growing, he rebuked the evil spirit. Listen, you spirit that makes this boy unable to hear and speak, he said, I command you to come out of this child and never enter him again. Then the spirit screamed and threw the boy into another violent convulsion and left him. The boy appeared to be dead. A murmur ran through the crowd as people said, he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and helped him to his feet, and he stood up. As usual, Jesus has no interest in theatrics. He doesn't want a crowd, and so as the people start gathering around to gawk, he quickly commands the demon to leave, and the boy is healed. There's no struggle. There's no back and forth. There's no doubt about the outcome. Jesus commands, and the demon must obey. And for the first time in his life, this young boy is flourishing instead of withering. He's at peace instead of imprisoned. He can speak and hear and breathe. Oh, the power of Jesus for him and for you and for me. He came to raise us up. He came to set us free. He came to open our eyes and our ears and to give us a voice. And that's the end of the miracle, but not the end of the story. Afterwards, Jesus debriefs with his disciples. Verse 28 says, afterward, when Jesus was alone in the house with his disciples, they asked him, why couldn't we cast out that evil spirit? Jesus replied, this kind can be cast out only by prayer. See, the disciples are curious. Jesus, you gave us authority to cast out demons, and we did. In the previous chapter, we've seen that Jesus sent them out. He gave them the authority and the ability to heal people and to cast out demons. So Jesus, you gave us the authority and we had it, but this demon wouldn't budge when we commanded him to go. What did we do wrong? And the very question shows a misunderstanding of how the power of Jesus works. David Garland is a New Testament scholar, and this is what he writes about this particular passage. He says, in the ancient world, magicians, sorcerers, and exorcists sought to hit the right combination of words and actions that would invoke the appropriate divine power to achieve the desired effects. They would weave esoteric spells and perform mysterious actions and use special instruments. It was all a matter of technique. Any relationship to the gods, such as love or devotion, was not required for success, just as one who possessed Aladdin's lamp need only rub it to get the 3 wishes. And then he makes this comment, Jesus' answer to his disciples makes clear that his exorcisms have nothing to do with secret lore, with techniques, or incantations. So where does spiritual power come from? Well, Jesus says this kind requires much prayer. But here's what's really interesting to me here. Jesus doesn't pray. Jesus didn't pray before he cast out this demon. It doesn't appear that he engaged in any prayer of any kind. He just told the demon, leave, get out of here, and the demon left. He commands the demon to go, and the demon does. So if Jesus didn't pray, what does he mean when he says this kind can only be cast out by prayer? Well, what he means is this. There is no prayer. There is no formula. There is no recitation. There is no invocation that will obligate God to move. There is nothing you can say or do that will obligate God to move, because that would be magic, and God simply doesn't do magic. There are no magic words. Rather, there is only a close, abiding, continuous relationship with God. There is only a life of constant prayer and constant communion and connection. And guess what, folks? That's where the power lies. And that is what Jesus had. That's why he didn't need to pray in that moment. It's because his entire life was a prayer. His entire life was just one running interaction with God that never stopped. You want to know and experience God's power unleashed in your life and through you? Then cultivate a relationship with him. Be near to him. Surrender yourself to him. Jesus is teaching his disciples here that their power doesn't come through some technique. Okay, it's not how you do it. It simply comes as they learn to live with him, to abide in him. He is their source. And he is our source too. And we must learn how to live that way if we want to see his power and his presence and his peace in our lives. Eugene Peterson, in his book Earth and Altar, writes this about learning to live that way. He says, "Be still. Quit rushing through the streets long enough to become aware that there is more to life than your little self-help enterprises. When we are noisy and when we are hurried, we are incapable of intimacy, deep, complex, personal relationships. If God is the living center of redemption, it is essential that we be in touch with and responsive to that personal will. If God has a will for this world and we want to be in on it, we must be still long enough to find out what it is. For we certainly are not going to learn by watching the evening news." Baron von Hugel, who had a wise word on most subjects, always held out that nothing was ever accomplished in a stampede. And unfortunately, that describes our lives, doesn't it? A stampede. The key to faith, the key to God's power unleashed in me, the key to Jesus' presence and peace is pressing in toward him. It's not some technique. The key to living, breathing, vibrant faith is knowing him. There are two phrases that I want you to remember in this passage. The first one, I believe, help me overcome my unbelief. I believe, help my unbelief. And then secondly, this kind can only be cast out by prayer. Both of those statements take us to the same place. They're both a way of saying actively trust God. Cultivate a life filled with awareness that Jesus is here and his power has no limits. And so trust him and then know his peace. How do you need to respond to this passage today? Here's some things to think about. Where do you need to pray, I believe, help me overcome my unbelief? I believe, help my unbelief. What keeps you from giving your trust to God? And are you willing to give it to him now? Here's another one. How are you relying on your own strength instead of resting in Jesus' power? And by the way, a good way to get at that one is, what are you worrying about? What is it that kind of gnaws at the back of your head here and just bothers you? That may be an area where you're relying on your strength instead of God's. Finally, what is one way this week you can be in God's presence? What is one way this week you can be in God's presence? Live a life of prayer before him instead of merely saying prayers to him. Jesus is here. He is present. His power is for us. And ours is not to have a 100% certain faith. Ours is simply to believe that He is the God of unlimited power, and He loves us, and He is with us. And so we give ourselves to Him. We're going to end our time this morning by receiving communion together. And this is the ultimate symbol, or this is the symbol of the ultimate gift that Jesus gave us. It shows us how much Jesus is for us and then the lengths to which He was willing to go in order for us to experience His peace and His life and His power and His presence. Communion was started by Jesus Himself. It was the night before He was betrayed and crucified. He was eating a meal with His disciples. And partway through the meal, He picked up a piece of bread and He broke it. And He said, "This is my body, which is broken for you. As often as you eat this, remember me." And the disciples had no idea what He was talking about. The next day, He was nailed to a cross, and His body was broken so that we could experience His peace and presence and power in our lives. Let's eat together and remember what He has done. A little bit later in the meal, Jesus held up a cup of wine. And He said, "This is my blood, which is poured out for you. Whenever you drink this, remember me." And again, the disciples had no idea what He was talking about, but the very next day, as He was nailed to a cross, His blood was spilled. And because His blood was spilled, He was able to take our sin, our oppression upon Himself. And He died, and then He rose from the dead to show that He has the power to do what He said He could do, to bring us His peace and presence. And so as we drink, let's remember what Jesus has done. Let's invite Him in a new way. Let's pray. Jesus, I resonate so much with that father who said, "I believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." And Lord, I think that's the human condition. We believe and yet we don't. We want to know that You're here and yet we doubt. And so, Lord, I thank You that You don't turn away from us in the midst of our unbelief, that You actually step closer to us. And that not only stepped to us, but that You loved us so much that You came in the person of Jesus, who died for us and then rose from the dead, so that our fragile belief would have something to hold it up and our faith could come to life. Lord, I thank You that it doesn't depend on us, that it's not about how much faith we have and how much we try and work and strive, but rather it's all about knowing and believing that Your power is unlimited and resting in that and allowing You the chance to work. And so I pray, Lord, that wherever we all are right now, You will meet us. And Lord, let us respond to You and experience Your grace and rest in You and trust You and watch You work. Thank You. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.